What if the most powerful wealth-building system ever created was not written in the last decade, not born in Silicon Valley, and not discovered by a hedge fund manager or a startup founder, but instead carved into clay tablets in an ancient city that no longer exists? What if the reason most people remain financially stuck their entire lives has nothing to do with their income, their education, or the economy, and everything to do with a handful of timeless principles they were simply never taught? George S. Clason answered both of those questions in 1926, and the world has never argued with him since. The Richest Man in Babylon is not a theory book. It is not a motivational speech dressed in financial language. It is a collection of parables set in the ancient city of Babylon, the wealthiest civilization the world had ever known, and each story carries a specific, actionable law about money that is held true across centuries, cultures, and economic systems. The principles inside this book built fortunes in ancient Mesopotamia, and they are building fortunes right now, today, for everyone who takes them seriously. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand exactly why most people never accumulate wealth, and more importantly, exactly what the wealthy do differently every single time. There is one question this book plants early that most readers think they have already answered, and it will stay open until the very end of this breakdown. That question is this: if you already know the basic rules of money, why are you not yet financially free? Stay with that. And before we go any further, do something that will genuinely serve your future self right now. Subscribe to the Book Vault and hit the like button. This channel releases strategic intelligence from the world's most powerful books every single week, designed to give ambitious thinkers a real, compounding, unfair advantage in life. Now, let us walk into Babylon. The Man Who Desired Gold. The story that opens this entire book introduces us to Bansir, a chariot builder in ancient Babylon, and through his struggle, Clason immediately sets the emotional foundation for everything that follows. We arrive at the very first chapter, The Man Who Desired Gold, and what Clason does here is quietly devastating. Bansir is not a failure. He is skilled, hardworking, and respected. Yet after decades of labor, he sits at his workbench with an empty purse and no explanation for why. He has worked as hard as anyone he knows. He has nothing to show for it. And that silence, that confusion, is the precise emotional condition most people reading this book recognize in themselves. Bansir's friend Kobe the musician sits beside him, equally skilled, equally empty. Together they arrive at a question that reshapes the entire trajectory of the book. Why, they ask, does Arkad, their childhood acquaintance, swim in gold while they struggle for bread? They are no less intelligent, no less capable, no less willing to work hard. The difference is not talent. The difference is not. Specifically, Arkad possesses a specific understanding of how money behaves that Bansir and Kobe were never given. And that realization is the first quiet earthquake of the book. Most people think wealth is about income. Clason begins dismantling that belief on the very first page. Bansir earns money. He always has. The problem is not the flow of gold into his hands, but the complete absence of gold remaining in them. Money has a way of disappearing from the lives of those who have not learned to keep it. This is not bad luck. It is not injustice. It is a pattern, and like all patterns, it can be broken once it is understood. That understanding begins the moment Bansir and Kobe decide to seek out Arkad and ask him directly how he became the richest man in Babylon. What Arkad tells them is not complicated. It is not exotic. It is not reserved for the gifted or the privileged, but it is strict. And strictness is exactly what most people are unwilling to bring to their relationship with money. What comes next reshapes everything. The Richest Man of Babylon, we now enter the chapter where Arkad himself speaks, the chapter simply called The Richest Man in Babylon, and what he reveals about the origin of his fortune is the chapter that has quietly changed more financial trajectories than almost any other piece of writing in modern history. Arkad did not inherit his wealth. He did not stumble into it. He did not win it. He built it through a single discipline that he practiced without exception for years, long before it produced any visible result. And he learned it not from a wealthy family, but from a moneylender named Algamish, who gave him the first law of gold in exchange for a night of copying work. Algamish told Arkad something so simple, it almost offended him. He said, "A part of all you earn is yours to keep. Not all of it, not most of it. A part, specifically at least 1/10, before paying anyone else, before covering any expense, before honoring any obligation. Arkad was instructed to pay himself first, always, without negotiation. This single discipline, practiced consistently, is the seed from which every fortune in the book eventually grows. And yet most people do the exact opposite every single month. They pay everyone else first and keep whatever remains, which is almost always nothing. Arkad tried to spend the saved tenth quickly, reasoning that small amounts could not possibly build real wealth. Algamish returned, saw the money gone, and gave Arkad the second piece of wisdom, one that most people learn too late. Gold placed into the hands of those who do not understand its laws will flee from them as surely as it came. Arkad had given his savings to a brickmaker who knew nothing about jewels and lost it entirely. The lesson was not cruelty. The lesson was precision. Seek counsel from those who are competent in the field where you are investing. This is where I'm about to tell you something that is the part of this book most people skim past and almost everyone pays for later. Arkad eventually learned to make his gold work. He did not merely save it. He deployed it into reliable income-producing vehicles under the guidance of people who genuinely understood those vehicles. His wealth did not grow because he was exceptional. It grew because he was exceptional. It grew because he was consistent, selective, and patient. The system worked not because Arkad was brilliant. It worked because the system itself was sound. 7 Cures for a Lean Purse. The chapter at the heart of this entire book, the one that delivers Clason's most concentrated and actionable wisdom, is called 7 Cures for a Lean Purse. And we arrive here at what is essentially the complete operating manual for building wealth from any starting point. Babylon's king, concerned that the city's wealth was concentrated in too few hands, commands Arkad to teach the citizens the secrets of acquiring gold. What Arkad teaches them across 7 principles is as precise and practical today as it was in ancient Babylon, possibly more so given how thoroughly modern culture discourages every single one of them. The first cure is to start thy purse to fattening, which means saving a minimum 10% of everything you earn before touching the rest. The second is to control thy expenditures, because no matter how much a person earns, their desires will always expand to consume it unless deliberately contained. The third cure is to make thy gold multiply, meaning savings must be put to work in income-producing investments rather than sitting idle. These first 3 principles alone, applied together and without exception, are statistically sufficient to build meaningful wealth over any sustained period. And what I'm about to tell you is the part of this book that most people never even reach. The fourth cure is to guard thy treasures from loss, which Clason considers among the most violated laws of wealth. The first principle of investment, he insists, is the preservation of principal. Before asking how much you might gain, ask how certain it is that you will not lose. The fifth cure is to make of thy dwelling a profitable investment to own rather than rent when conditions allow. The sixth is to ensure a future income, meaning to build toward a day when your labor is no longer required for your survival. The seventh is to increase thy ability to earn, to invest in knowledge and skill as persistently as you invest in gold. All 7 cures operate as a system. Implementing one without the others produces partial results. Implementing all 7 produces compounding results that become increasingly difficult to stop over time. Most people implement 0 because 0 requires no discipline. 1 is harder, 7 is rare, but 7 is exactly what Arkad taught, and exactly what the wealthiest citizens of Babylon actually practiced. Meet the goddess of good luck. We shift now into one of the most psychologically rich chapters in the entire book, a chapter that forces an uncomfortable confrontation with one of the most seductive myths most people carry about wealth, and Clason calls it, Meet the Goddess of Good Luck. The men of Babylon gather to discuss whether luck is a matter of chance or a matter of character. The debate reveals something most people sense, but few articulate clearly. Good luck, in Clason's framework, is not a divine gift distributed randomly. It is the natural consequence of decisiveness applied to opportunity at the right moment. Clason introduces what he calls the law of attraction as it relates to fortune, and it has nothing mystical about it. Opportunity, he argues, presents itself to everyone with roughly equal frequency. What separates those who capitalize on it from those who watch it pass is a single behavior, the willingness to act without waiting for perfect conditions. Procrastination is not caution. Procrastination is the most expensive financial habit most people have, because the opportunity that passes while you deliberate is gone permanently, and the cost of that absence compounds invisibly over time. This is where human nature becomes genuinely dangerous. Because procrastination never announces itself as fear, it disguises itself as preparation, as patience, as prudence. Clason cuts through the disguise with a blunt observation. The man who waits for a guaranteed outcome before acting will wait his entire life. Luck, in the Babylonian understanding, rewards those who are already in motion. It does not find people who are sitting still. The deeper principle embedded in this chapter is this: you cannot steer a parked vehicle. The people who consistently appear to be lucky are almost always people who are consistently in action, consistently evaluating opportunities, and consistently prepared to move when the moment aligns. They do not receive more luck. They generate more opportunities to be lucky by refusing to stand still. What the next chapter reveals takes this principle further into territory that is far less comfortable: the 5 laws of gold. Now we arrive at the chapter that Clason himself considered the philosophical spine of the entire book, the chapter that distills centuries of Babylonian financial wisdom into 5 laws that govern gold as surely as gravity governs falling objects, and he calls it the 5 laws of gold. These laws are delivered through the story of Namasir, son of Arkad, who was given a choice between a bag of gold and a clay tablet inscribed with the 5 laws. He chooses the gold, loses it entirely, and then uses the laws to rebuild a fortune greater than the original bag could ever have produced. The lesson is embedded in that sequence, deliberately. The first law states that gold comes gladly and in increasing quantity to any person who will save not less than 1/10 of their earnings to build an estate for their future. The second law states that gold labors diligently and multiples for the person who finds for a profitable employment. The third law states that gold clings to the protection of the cautious owner who invests it under the advice of those wise in its handling. The fourth law is the one that separates the wealthy from the perpetually struggling. Gold slips away from the person who invests in businesses or purposes that they are not familiar with, or who listen to romantic promises of extraordinary profit. This is the law that destroys more wealth than any other single human behavior. The promise of extraordinary returns on unfamiliar investments is the oldest financial trap in human history. It was destroying wealth in ancient Babylon. It is destroying wealth today. The vocabulary has changed. The trap has not. Most people who have lost significant money lost it, not to bad luck, but to this exact violation of the fourth law. They trusted a promise they had no framework to evaluate from a source they had no real reason to trust. The fifth law completes the framework. Gold flees from the person who would force it to impossible earnings or who follows the alluring advice of tricksters and schemers. These 5 laws are not suggestions. In Clason's world, they are forces, as impersonal and reliable as physics. Align with them and wealth accumulates. Violate them and wealth dissolves. That is not a moral judgment. It is simply how gold behaves. The Gold Lender of Babylon. We enter now one of the most practically instructive chapters in the book, a chapter about the nature of risk, lending, and the hidden psychology behind financial decisions, and it is called The Gold Lender of Babylon. The story centers on Rodan the spear maker, who has received a gift of 50 pieces of gold from the king and is immediately pressured by his brother-in-law to lend it to him for a business venture. Rodan, uncertain, visits Mathan the gold lender to seek wisdom. What Mathan teaches him permanently reframes how intelligent people think about money and obligation. Bothing shows Rodan his chest of tokens, each representing a loan he has made. Some tokens are of gold and ivory, representing borrowers who have collateral, who have skin in the game, whose character and reliability have been observed over time. Other tokens are of wood and bone, representing loans made on hope alone, on sentiment, on relationship rather than evidence. Mathan's lesson is precise. Lending should be governed by the borrower's ability to repay, their assets as security, and their character as demonstrated over time. Sentiment is not a financial instrument. Love for a person does not make them a competent business operator. Most people think being generous with money is a virtue without consequence. In reality, lending money that cannot be repaid does not help the borrower. It burdens them with guilt and damages the relationship. It does not honor the lender's financial obligations to their own family and future. Mathan is not cold, he is honest. And that honesty, applied consistently, is what makes him wealthy enough to lend in the first place. You cannot give from an empty purse forever. Rodan walks away with a framework rather than a simple answer. And that is exactly what Clason intends. The goal of this chapter is not to make the reader stingy. It is to make the reader precise. There is a profound difference between generosity rooted in abundance and sentimental lending rooted in guilt. One builds relationships and wealth simultaneously. The other quietly destroys both. The walls of Babylon. We arrive now at the final chapter of the strategic breakdown, a chapter that operates on a different level than the others, using the ancient walls of Babylon as a metaphor for something every financially ambitious person must eventually build, and Clason calls it the walls of Babylon. Babylon's walls were legendary, considered impenetrable by the armies of the ancient world. They protected not through aggression, but through preparation, built long before any enemy arrived, fortified through decades of intentional investment in defense. The city did not wait until the siege began to build its protection. It built its protection in times of peace, knowing that siege conditions were inevitable. Clason uses this image to deliver what is perhaps the most sobering financial lesson in the entire book. Your financial laws are your insurance, your savings reserve, your diversified income streams, your debt-free foundation. Most people build none of these things during prosperous periods. They expand their lifestyle to match their income, they take on obligations that leave them exposed, and when the economic siege inevitably comes, whether through job loss, health crisis, market collapse, or unexpected expense, they have no walls. They have only the vulnerability they refused to address when they had the resources to do otherwise. The false ending arrives here, precisely at this point in the book, because Clason appears to be closing with a simple message about financial safety, but beneath that surface instruction lies something far more unsettling. He is not just talking about money. He is talking about the arrogance of prosperity, the deeply human tendency to believe that good conditions will persist indefinitely and to make decisions as though the siege will never come. Every person who has ever faced a financial catastrophe and said they never saw it coming was not unlucky. They were unbothered by the warnings because the warnings arrived during comfortable times. The walls of Babylon were not built by accident. They were not built in response to a crisis. They were built by leaders who understood that preparation during peace is the only reliable form of protection during war. Clason's final instruction through this metaphor is this: build your walls now while you have the time, the income, and the emotional clarity to do it thoughtfully. The siege is not a question of if, it is only ever a question of when. Key lessons and insights. The first lesson: pay yourself before you pay anyone else. The first lesson this entire book teaches, and the one that operates as the non-negotiable foundation of every other principle, is what Clason frames as the oldest and most powerful law of personal finance. Before any bill is paid, before any obligation is honored, before any desire is satisfied, a minimum of 10% of everything you earn belongs permanently to your future self, not to your landlord, not to your credit card, not to the restaurant or the retailer, to you. This single discipline, maintained without exception regardless of income level, is statistically the most reliable predictor of long-term financial accumulation across every economic era ever studied. The practical application is not complicated, but it requires identity-level commitment. Set up an automatic transfer of 10% of every income deposit into a completely separate account that is not mentally categorized as spending money. Do not negotiate with yourself about the percentage when times feel tight. Clason is explicit. If you cannot live on 90% of your income, you will not live better on 100% of it. You will simply accumulate nothing instead. The discomfort of adapting to 90% is temporary. The freedom that accumulates from doing so consistently is permanent. The second lesson: make your gold work as hard as you do. The second lesson woven through every story in this book is that saving money is only the first step, and stopping there is one of the most common and costly mistakes people make with their financial lives. Gold that sits idle does not merely stagnate. In an inflationary world, idle gold actively loses purchasing power over time. Clason's wealthy characters do not hoard, they deploy. Every coin saved is eventually put to work inside reliable, understood, income-producing vehicles guided by people who have demonstrated genuine competence in that specific area. The application here demands two commitments simultaneously. First, develop enough financial literacy to evaluate opportunities independently before trusting anyone else's assessment of them. Second, cultivate relationships with advisors who have a verifiable, demonstrated track record in the specific type of investment you're considering. A brilliant real estate mind is not automatically a reliable guide to equity markets. A successful entrepreneur is not automatically a trustworthy cryptocurrency advisor. Competence is domain-specific. Seek guidance that matches the domain and always verify before you deploy. The third lesson: guard against loss before you chase gain. The third lesson Clason delivers through Arcad, through Mathen, and through Nomasir's devastating early failure is that the preservation of principle is more important than the pursuit of return. This runs directly against the psychological instincts of most aspiring wealth builders, who naturally focus on upside rather than downside. But Clason's historical evidence is relentless. Across every era of Babylonian prosperity, the consistent destroyer of accumulated wealth was not insufficient returns. It was catastrophic losses taken in pursuit of extraordinary gains from unfamiliar or fraudulent ventures. The practical filter is simple, and it should be applied before every significant financial decision without exception. Before asking how much you could gain, ask how certain it is that you will not lose your principal entirely. If that question cannot be answered with genuine confidence based on evidence rather than optimism, the answer is no. This filter will cause you to miss some opportunities. It will also cause you to avoid the losses that most people spend years trying to recover from. Recovery from significant loss is not just financially costly, it is psychologically devastating in ways that compound silently for years. The fourth lesson: opportunity rewards motion, not preparation. The fourth lesson that resolves one of the central tensions this book creates is drawn directly from the chapter on luck, and it answers something most ambitious people wrestle with quietly. Preparation is not the enemy of action, but preparation used as a substitute for action is one of the most expensive habits an ambitious person can maintain. Clason's Babylonian wisdom is blunt. The person who waits for the perfect moment, the complete picture, the guaranteed outcome before committing to action will find that opportunity has a short patience for hesitation. It moves to whoever is already in motion. The application this week, not someday, is this: identify the one financial decision or action you have been preparing to make for more than 3 months. Ask yourself with full honesty whether the delay is genuinely producing better information or whether it is producing the comfort of feeling responsible without the discomfort of actual commitment. In most cases, the additional preparation adds marginal value. The action itself would have produced far more learning than any further analysis. Move, adjust from motion. That is how the Babylonians accumulated gold, and it is how wealth is built today. The fifth lesson: build your walls before the siege arrives. The fifth and final lesson is also the answer to the open question planted at the very beginning of this breakdown, the question of why people who already know the basic rules of money still fail to become financially free. The answer Clason reveals across every parable in this book is this: knowledge without protective structure is fragile. Most people know they should save. Most people know they should invest. Most people know they should protect against risk. But knowing without building is precisely as useful as understanding the principles of architecture without ever laying a single brick. The walls of Babylon were not theoretical. They were physical, built through consistent effort over long periods of time, layer by layer, before any threat materialized. Your financial walls, your emergency reserve, your passive income streams, your debt elimination, your insurance structures must be built the same way, not in response to crisis. During prosperity, the practical action is not complicated. Choose one wall to begin building this month. One layer, not the whole structure, just the first brick, because the siege is not a metaphor, it is a certainty. And the only question that matters is whether you are building now or waiting. The vault closing this book was written nearly a century ago, set in a civilization that crumbles more than 2,000 years before that, and yet every principle inside it is as alive and as urgently relevant as anything published this morning. That is not a coincidence. That is what happens when wisdom is built on the actual behavior of money rather than the theories, trends, and market conditions of any particular era. George Clason was not describing an ancient economy. He was describing human nature, and human nature has not updated its firmware since Babylon was built. The one action to take within the next 7 days is precisely this. Take 10% of your next income deposit before touching anything else and move it permanently into a separate account designated as your future. Label it intentionally. Call it your wealth account, your freedom fund, your future self. Whatever language creates genuine emotional meaning for you. Do not decide how to invest it yet. Just begin the act of keeping it. That single behavior, practiced consistently, is the seed from which every principle in this book eventually grows. Everything else, the investing, the compounding, the systems of automation, all of it follows naturally from this one unbreakable habit. The book vault exists for exactly this reason, not to give you more things to think about, but to give you fewer, better ideas to act on. The people who change their lives after watching content like this are not the ones who find it interesting. They are the ones who find it useful enough to do something before this window closes. If this breakdown earned your trust today, pay it forward in the simplest way possible. Like this video, subscribe to the Book Vault, and drop your single biggest takeaway in the comments below. You are not just watching a book summary, you are joining a community of people who refuse to stay average. Babylon's richest citizen started with nothing but a principle and the discipline to honor it. So can you.